Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about the Ukraine conflict and how Vladimir Putin and Russia are winning very decisively against Ukraine and the entirety of the West right now. And so we have a post by Megatron here on how Julian Roki and the German Bild media have said, my contacts within the Ukrainian Army also tell me it's not just that there's a lack of 155 and 152 millimeter artillery shells. Nothing works anymore. The Western self-propelled howitzers are not made for a real long war, but only for short missions. Okay, so a few things here. Julian Roki is someone who is a very well-known Ukraine supporter, and so for him to come out and say something like this should tell you that things are getting very serious there. Another thing is they do not have the ammo production necessary in order to actually use the artillery they currently have. So they're not making enough 155 and 152 millimeter shells, despite nearly 2 years of warfare going on, that the United States and the Western world could have bumped up its manufacturing capacity. And so they're just not able to do that. If they were able to do that, they would have done that to a very large extent by now. They're just not, they don't have the manufacturing capacity anymore. And the third thing here is this last sentence. The Western self-propelled howitzers are not made for a real long war, but only for short missions. And I've talked about this. The Alexes on the Duran talked about this. Brian Berletic has talked about this. I think John Mearsheimer might have mentioned this when he was talking to the Duran as well. We've all said that Western equipment is meant to fight essentially insurgencies, terroristic threats, small, like really just goat herders. They're just meant to shoot up tribal people who do not have heavy artillery equipment. They're not a near peer or peer rival to the Western world, to the United States, to NATO. And so all this equipment is just really fancy trinkets that work in the short term, cost a ton of money to use, even sometimes just using it infrequently. And it does not work in a long-term conflict because the United States did not expect to find itself in a long-term conflict after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It thought it was at the end of history. It thought it was the sole superpower for all of eternity. And so they just didn't prepare. Their equipment is extremely expensive. It's not durable. It's not reliable. It's hard to use. It's hard to maintain. It's hard to train to use. I mean, it's just so bad. And that's the state of the Western military, where it's being beat by Russia now. And so we can see some numbers about manufacturing capacity, and this is by Arnaud Bertrand. Insane manufacturing and service PMI in France is so bad it's approaching COVID shutdown levels. Okay, so when things just completely shut down, that's what they're at, or close to what they're at now. Same picture in Germany and several other European countries. So Germany was supposed to be the manufacturing hub of all of the European Union, and it's deindustrializing along with France and other countries. Europe is really losing on all sides these days, losing its cheap energy from Russia, losing whatever remained of its manufacturing to the U.S. with the Inflation Reduction Act. I talk about this all the time, but the United States, in order to prop itself up for a few more years, in order to figure out how to win a war with China, they are cannibalizing all of their allies. They cannibalize Japan, they cannibalize Germany, cannibalizing the United Kingdom, cannibalize Ukraine. They're trying to take the semiconductor industry from Taiwan, so they're cannibalizing them. They're doing everything possible. They're letting countries like South Korea suffer and lose in terms of trade export capacity to places like China because of their semiconductor trade war with China. I mean, there's in every capacity, they are cannibalizing their allies in order to prop themselves up for a few more years while they try to figure out a solution to the situation. There is no solution. The United States is in terminal decline. The oligarchs will be held accountable eventually. But anyways, the article goes on to say, losing its relationship with the global south due to its gobsmacking geopolitical incompetence. Yeah, the United States, they lost pretty big in terms of the Ukraine-Russia war. Initially, it looked like they were winning, but they lost a lot of support from the global south pretty quickly within the first year of the conflict. But then this Israeli-Palestine conflict, the Gaza genocide going on, they really, really lost the global south with that conflict. It's so weird because I see people who I respect greatly talking about how the United States is clearly in charge of Israel and they could stop Israel whenever they want. It's to the United States' benefit to have Israel there. I see people I respect a lot like Brian Berletic saying that. But when you look at it, if it comes down to things like energy, access to energy and the exploitation of the resources there, you would choose the side of Iran and Saudi Arabia over the side of Israel. And I know the Saudi government is working with the Israelis too, but the population does not want to be. And the Saudi government is not, I think they're only grudgingly working with the Israelis because the Americans want them to. And so if you had to choose a side in this conflict, you would either choose to support both sides in order to profit from it, which throughout history a lot of people have done. They've provided funding, they've provided equipment, etc., to both sides in order to profit from it. Or you would take the side of the oil-producing countries over Israel. And so there's something happening in Israel that is different from other conflicts in the world, where the United States is actively doing things that harms its own interests, its security interests, its economic interests, over and over and over again in order to support Israel. So that should tell you something about the relationship between the United States and Israel, because it seems pretty clear to me that Israel is the one in charge here, because the United States is doing things that very clearly do not benefit itself. Like in the Ukraine conflict, for example, we could say they thought they could defeat Russia, take apart Russia, and put a bunch of little proxies in its place that they could point towards China and threaten China from multiple directions. They could also extract the resources and exploit the populace of Russia more easily if they broke up the country. And so they thought truly that they would be able to win this conflict because they thought that Russia was a gas station pretending to be a country. And that was an extreme miscalculation, but you could clearly see why they would take the side of Ukraine if that was the miscalculation they're taking. There is no scenario where taking Israel's side benefits the United States over taking the side of, say, Saudi Arabia and even pushing out Iran. See, what they could do, I think, in this situation is open up a third front and say, we're cutting Israel loose, we're going to take Saudi Arabia's side, and we're going to suppress Iran, because they have such a hateful relationship with Iran at this point. I don't think there's really solving that diplomatic relationship anymore. And so they could stab Israel in the back and cannibalize them the way they're cannibalizing all their other allies, but they're not doing that because you're not understanding the relationship between the United States and Israel. The majority of donor funding in the United States comes from Zionists. The largest, most powerful lobby in the United States is the Israeli lobby, AIPAC. The United States and its politicians are controlled by Israel. In fact, Netanyahu has been caught on tape talking about this, how they control the United States political system. Okay? And so people think the United States controls Israel, Israel is a colony of the United States. If that was the case, we would not be seeing the United States in this current situation. They would just cannibalize Israel like they've cannibalized everyone else. Okay? If Israel controlled the United States, which all evidence does support, we would be seeing this situation. And so the way I view it is people have a lens, a worldview, a paradigm through which they view the world. And you enter data into that lens, and it gives you an output. And that output is your prediction about what's happening, why it's happening, your interpretation of reality. And my perspective on the world, my worldview, my lens through which I view the world is giving me accurate information about the current situation in Israel and in Palestine. It's also giving me an accurate interpretation of the situation in Russia and Ukraine. And so because of that, and because the alternative, a lens that would say that the United States is in charge of Israel instead of vice versa, because that doesn't make sense in the current situation, I can tell you that my lens is highly accurate. And because of that, that's why I make these types of videos. I try to convey in words what I think and why I think it, so that you can integrate parts of my worldview, parts of my lens through which I view the world, in order to come up with more accurate predictions of the world. And so that's what I'll leave you with. Let me read the rest of this, and then I think that's a pretty good stopping point after we read this. So it goes on to say, Europe is really losing on all sides. Okay, so losing the next generation with plummeting education levels. I need to check the latest OECD PISA results. So they're just not as qualified as they kind of used to be. And any people that are qualified are competent in Europe. There's a brain drain where they either go to America or they go to China. So Europe is just losing on all fronts. A couple decades ago, the European Union was ahead of the United States, and now they're severely, severely behind the United States. And that's because, as I talked about, they're being cannibalized by the United States. And so he goes on to say, and there's no one, absolutely no one that I can see in the political spectrum in any of the major European countries who seems to have the beginning of a start of a appealing vision to restore things. All I can see is either denial, we're not losing, blame the immigrants as if they had anything to do with any of this, and blame Russia or China, or some ludicrously naive proposal like let's embrace degrowth. And that's the real issue. We lose so much because Europe has stunningly incompetent leaders who simply don't know what to do. So that's what happened. Was the United States took out the entire leadership class of Europe and made sure that other leaders were very malleable, docile, and very beholden and blackmailed in a lot of cases by the United States. And so there really is no leadership class in Europe because their function as leaders was to be puppets of the United States. And that's exactly what we found here. So really interesting stuff going on in Europe. Very sad that there's just no one to step up to be a leader. And even if there was, they would be suppressed by the system because they don't truly live in democratic countries. They live in United States controlled countries. So if you found this video to be informative, helpful, interesting, I know I went on a little bit of a tangent, but if you found any of this to be helpful at all, please give us a thumbs up. It does help us in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Rumble for more content. Please tell a friend about our channel. We are trying to grow our channel, and so word of mouth helps us if you think they might be interested in this type of content. And please leave us a comment in the comment box below. Questions, concerns, critiques. I do read all of them, and I do appreciate them, and I will respond if it seems like it's necessary. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.